is the podcast brought to you by GAIA Africa, a private members business club for women committed to developing and servicing the top 5% of Africa's lustrous female founders, corporate CEOs, other C-suite executives, professionals, board members, business innovators, and creatives. The 5-episode podcast series is sponsored by indigenous oil and gas company Pinnacle Oil and Gas, who's active across the entire downstream value chain, with emphasis on petroleum trading, marketing, distribution, and retail segments of the Nigerian oil and gas sector. We've been having fantastic conversations. Today we are on to episode 4. And all those conversations, we started off with, let me just remember. Okay. So we started off with investing in human capital. Then we went on to creating economic opportunities. And then, of course, leveraging technology. But at the bane of all the conversations we've been having, there seemed to be one underlying factor which lies in the society. And that's why today's episode is even more exciting for me, because it just may be getting to the brass tacks of why that needle has refused to shift, at least in Nigeria, that needle of gender parity. And the topic is shaping attitudes. I have 2 great speakers in the house. We've been having great speakers all through. That's the good thing about the GAIA network. It's my pleasure to welcome on set today, Papa Omotayo.
Hey.
Papa Omotayo is a founder of Whitespace Creative Agency and creative director of MOE Art Architecture. Papa is an award-winning architect, a designer, a writer, a filmmaker. Papa's work strongly focuses on exploring the nature of culture and the context within contemporary Nigerian and the extended African condition, locally and globally. You are a cultural expert. It's nice to have you.
Lovely to be here.
Great. And Fola, on the other hand, at the beginning, if you guys remember, the very first podcast, Fola Ambrose Medebem was one of the people that we thanked for giving birth to this idea in the first place and willing to run with it. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Fola. Fola was shocked that we're recording this on video, but I'm sure because she's definitely a very private person, but she's very, 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 very vocal, and women empowerment is very important to her, which is why I'll start her introduction by talking about her NGO, which we call WIN, and it's WIIN.
Yes.
Which is Women Inspiring Impact Network,
yes.
And not for profit. But however, beyond all of that, Fola is a multifaceted international leader with over 2 decades experience spanning across strategy and performance management, finance, business culture transformation, change, sustainability, and corporate affairs. During her career, she has worked for Financial Times, 100 companies in the UK, Europe, and Nigeria, where Fola Shade successfully led and executed robust business transformation award-winning strategies. Should I go on? But what I find most critical, at this point in time, you've been identified by the United Nations as one of the most influential people of African descent. Congratulations and welcome on the set. It's nice to have you. Attitudes. Let's start by talking about how are attitudes shaped, first of all? We all know about the gender parity issue, right? But let's begin by talking about how attitudes are shaped. And I want Papa to start from there, especially because I know Papa was named by his mother. Mommy gave you Papa, yeah. and it stuck. So tell me about it.
I know I think attitude is a complicated one, because I think from the moment we're born, we're all sort of we're formed by our immediate surroundings. So that's our parents, the society in which we're born in, and the values of those societies. And then we move through, traditional education, traditions, and those local cultures. And then obviously there's external influences from, television, books. But I think, I think the foundations of how we're formed is from the home. That's where everything really starts, the home, and then the extended culture in which you're born into.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you share the same views.
Absolutely. I not only share that view, but I'll even underscore it further. by alluding to the fact that in addition to what Papa has just said, it also characterizes these attitudes and values and belief systems he mentioned characterize people. And essentially that's what they become. But if I take it down a notch to Africa, for instance, we also have the underscored variables such as socio-economic variables such as poverty, illiteracy, culture, and all those sort of things that further define, those attitudes and beliefs.
So they come from our environment. So if that's the case, if biases exist here, right, as identified by speakers before and even identified by the Gender Parity report, The Power of Parity, Advancing Gender Equality in Africa by McKinsey. If that's the case, so is there a culture that is holding us back and ensuring that this needle doesn't move?
Well, if you think about stereotypes, for instance, gender stereotypes,
like
how when you're young, a girl is exposed to certain stereotypes, dolls. I don't think we've ever seen an astronaut baby Barbie doll. And then we see the young boys and they're sort of,
superhero.
Yeah, superhero and their power and things like that. So they're these are things that sort of influence, their perceptions, and as they grow up, it influences how they behave.
Do you think so too?
Look, I think for me, it's like most things are made up, as in the color blue, the color pink. Like, if you look at it abstractly, they're just random colors. But the decision that one must reference the desire of a male and the other must be female, like somebody decided that. That's not something inherent in who we are as human beings. So I think for me, like, there's always this contradiction between when we talk about what it means to be a human being, what it means to be free, and what it means to be socialized. And I think a lot of the time we conflate those things, because I think socialization brings a lot of bias, a lot of prejudice, a lot of decisions made by very small groups of people that don't have infinite knowledge. And sometimes I think it's very hard for us to sort of want to accept that, because it's so hard to just unsocialize yourself from what you know.
However, I mean, I guess that's why you find that what we call feminism has been seen by some as a threat to society. Do you agree with that? And is it an ideology or an attitude? And I'd like Fola to address that first.
Well, no. I mean, when you think about what is feminism in itself, it's really about advocating for equality, period, for all, irrespective of your gender. That's my understanding. And if we look back in our history, as a country in 1947, we're all familiar with the first woman that could drive. We're all familiar with the first woman that accompanied them when they wanted to propose the constitution for Nigeria, Mrs. Funmilayo Anikulapo Kuti.
That's right.
And what she did. And I mean, for me, if you're talking about feminism, she comes to mind when you think about that. And that was way back. And so she bucked the trend. And I feel that she's a fantastic example to use when you're defining, or should I say illustrating, what feminism actually means. Is it a threat? I wouldn't say it's a threat. I think it's a progressive reality nowadays. And it's something that certainly benefits, as we know, the world over, economies, benefits, families, the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. So anyone thinking that feminism is a threat will certainly benefit from being educated. And I just wanted to
establish that. But what do you think, though? I mean, is it true that are there different types of feminism? Are there different camps?
Yes.
Well, says yes. What do you think, Papa?
Man, it's a dodgy issue. It's a complicated issue. Look, I think for me, it's always about where we perceive value, right? So we can talk about, the first woman to drive, and because all of those things always seen from the perspective of men, right? Nobody categorizes men as in, first man to change, to look after their, to stay at home, or all of these things, right? And I think sometimes we need to understand that we're playing by sometimes categorizing first and these sort of like very prize-winning perspectives. We're sort of encouraging a value system that is like very patriarchal. And I think for me, like what feminism is yes, it's about equality, but it's always about equity. And I think that's something that there's a nuance there that we sometimes forget, that what we're trying to do is to understand that like having everybody on the same level means understanding the value of what everybody brings, right? Taking into account the things they can and they can't do. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I can sit here and I understand all the nuances of feminism, but I do think that a lot of it is about how we're wanting to categorize things in very traditional ways that sort of seem very patriarchal to me at times.
I hear you. I hear you struggle about categorizing.
Yeah.
So that's where the issue is for you. But what I pick from what you're saying is the function of equity, and equity means equal value.
Yeah.
Right? If I, not because I'm male or female, but equal value. But he seems to be saying that if we begin to place emphasis on people doing things in a particular way, for example, this man is great because he's staying at home. It starts looking like, why are we doing that? He's sitting at home, big deal. She drove a car, big deal. What do you think?
I'll say yes, it is a big deal, because at the end of the day, when you look at where women are across the world over, there is an imbalance.
How did this imbalance happen?
We just started with attitudes. We just started with the lack of policies, for instance. We've started with a lack of education in the homes from the very beginning. We just talked about when kids are born, at birth, they're almost, should I say, indoctrinated as to what a woman can do and what a man can do. Look at us, our fellow citizens, or, in the North, for instance. We know for a fact that not all girls are allowed to go to school. And yet in the North, or should I say in Nigeria, we have the highest out of school children in the world. And majority of those are girls. And those are facts. And if we had policy and legislation in place to ensure that there's equity, then I don't think we'd be having this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that's what I'm talking about, equity. I'm not saying that, that's what I'm saying, that we need to realize that there's social issues, right, which are very much about the facts. Right. But I'm saying that there's a fundamental failure in the value system historically, which sometimes we don't address. And that in itself is a complicated.
Can you name some of the failures? Because are we saying, for example, that okay, go ahead.
I mean, it's weird for me because, I came up with, like, my mother was, like the matriarch, like, my entire family is very much driven by her vision of the world.
And this is in Nigeria.
Yeah. And this is in Nigeria from the 1940s, etc. So, but at the same time, I've always been inherently aware of, I guess, the difficulties in her just doing like the simplest things, like deciding, well, I want to do this thing for my children. And people are like, well, who are you as a woman to want those things for your children? And for her, it was just that, what has being a woman wanting these things for my children got anything to do with the fact that...
Did she ignore them, though?
Yeah, of course, she ignored them. It was just this idea of just like, having the reason behind an action that is just absolutely objective. It wasn't necessarily to do with whether I'm a woman or not. I need to think this way. But like you mentioned, a lot of the lack of the ability to think that way is because there's a lack of education. There's a massive economic imbalance. And all of those things for me boil down with like, women have not been historically valued, not just in this environment, but globally. Right. And we're always in a situation where, as a man, you're just not even thinking half the time. You're just taking things for granted as you sort of live your day-to-day life.
Taking it for granted that she's going to stay home and look for the babies, for example.
I'm not even talking about from the sort of home point of view. I'm just talking from the ability to just walk the streets and not think about your safety, or, to decide to make a decision about your life and not having it questioned. So things that, as a man, you're just going about day to day without having to add an extra layer of thought or because of your gender.
Does biology have anything to do with it? Aren't we different in some ways? Are we saying we are the same, or that we're just different but equal? Fola?
I'd like to say there obviously is a difference. I mean, if we think about physically, men are stronger.
And we don't dispute that.
But then women are psychically stronger. Our power of intuition.
Yeah.
Our power, should I say, of standing up for what is right, our endurance, when in the battlefield, for instance, when there's sort of a crisis, how women are able to just withstand. So, I mean, we have to acknowledge the reality that there is a distinction between men and women and girls and boys, fact. However, giving women an equity or equitable platform is very important. There's so many statistics to prove that. If you think about religion, for instance, they sort of intertwine with cultures. They have sort of an impact in certain countries. And we can actually say the same applies here in the North, for instance, when we talk about that. But I think it's just so important that we have to acknowledge the realities on ground, that there is an imbalance. And because of that imbalance, how can we try and skew that? I mean, you just gave a fantastic illustration of the fact that your mother, raised you in a way whereby there's equity. And imagine if we could just multiply that across the world. Wouldn't this be a beautiful place to be? But that is not the reality. It's on ground and the reality that we have. And how do we try and make sure critical mass-wise that becomes an advocacy and a policy? So there's some realities that need to be on ground. Education, even what they teach them in schools. You see some of the curriculums in the education system, they perpetuate this, gender disparity.
It's interesting that culture is made by people, isn't it? So if culture is made by people, we should be able to make all of these things. So is it that we are reluctant to make culture, or what?
I don't know if we even understand the difference between culture and tradition. I think that's part of the problem. People think that these things can't evolve. And I think that's the illusion, right? And the illusion comes from people wanting to hold on to systems that are become archaic, because culture...
You say they're archaic.
They are archaic. It's not to say there's no value from history or there are not values from systems that have gone before. Absolutely, there's value, but there's also a lot of nonsense. And I think when you're in power, people want to hold on to that power. And even though they know that thing is gone. So I think ignoring the fact that these things have to be molded and remolded, that there needs to be an active desire, but also real policy. And I think that's on a grassroots level and at the sort of a systematic level. I think, systems where, workplaces are actually forced into having higher quotas of women than men is something that is really important. Obviously, the issue with the salary gaps absolutely need to be addressed. And, we can look at it in a way that it's like, oh, yeah, but, this thing is fair or this thing's not fair. I don't know. I don't think it's always about fairness when we haven't reached the point of equity. I think it's really about finding, real systems and real forms of understanding that allow for new ways that we can interact together.
Okay. One of the things I had all the while, new thinking, we got to think in a different way. But again, what Papa just raised, the issue of power play, it appears to me giving up power, is one of the issues in this gender imbalance. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. And why is that something that's so difficult to achieve? A number of reasons. When you think about, he just defined culture. I mean, it defines who you are. It's basically the way things are done around here. In a number of ways, values, beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, let's just take a facet of it to illustrate. If you think about unconscious bias, you don't even know that you're being biased in the way you're behaving in the workplace, for instance. You walk into a sales room and it's 100% men. Why so? And they don't know that they unconsciously are just hiring people that look like them, for instance, and just assume that when they do that, the performance. So do you understand? So but if you think about other things, those in the factory. I mean, I was working for a very well-known manufacturer until recently, and you'd go in there, and a bunch of them would all be men again, because I presume. When they have the shifts, when they have the night shift, the 24-hour shifts, et cetera, that women would not be able to manage that working coming in the middle of the night.
Sorry, I have to cut. Isn't it possible that women actually can't manage such jobs?
Okay, let me give you an example.
Isn't it possible?
Let's look around this room right now, right? This is a podcast that has been filmed, and I can count how many. I'm guessing most people here in
we're outnumbered.
Entertainment industry, and everybody here that is working behind the screen are men, and we can say that, like, what? Well, why?
Yes,
but
why?
we know why. Because
why?
The institution, right, in which most of these men operate in, do not make it feasible for women to participate, whether that's in terms of the unrealistic, like, working hours, whether it's the fact that the environment becomes dangerous, because I'm sure some of these guys are, like, moving around very late at night, but also ask them, why do they not make it comfortable for women to participate in what they're doing? So I think, it's like you mentioned, when you're in an environment and you just want people to look like you, but you never ask, why is it like this? And you need to have somebody in place to say that, you know what, this thing is not happening. You're not coming to my office. You're not doing this job with me unless you have a proportional representation.
And I really just want to underscore his point, because essentially, just taking your point even further, you said essentially challenge the status quo.
Absolutely.
Disrupt. Do you understand? Set some sort of numbers. You can't, if you measure, okay, within this organization, X number need to be women, for instance. That's about challenging the status quo, leading by example. And yes, even when women do come in, creating the environment that's conducive for them to stay, having a creche in the, security to escort them home, et cetera, and then actually acknowledging there's nothing wrong with having unconscious bias. You don't know you have it. And the only way you can do that is to educate. So run sessions in your organizations or even around, just to try and disrupt. But these are just some of the things that, it's just like they say, sanity is doing the same thing, the same way, and expecting a different result. Which
is why I think where we should start is, why is it so? Do we like it so? And what should we do differently? Which is, how can we address the attitudes? One basic bias, that women are less than men. Or, that women are less than men. Or are women Papa's rubbing his head.
This is are women I don't know. Those kind of questions just, I don't know. I guess partly because they never come into my headspace, but I think that's maybe the privilege of how I've been raised.
Yeah, well, you're a mother.
But also that word less. Less or more. I never know what people mean by somebody is less or somebody is more than. I think, like, everybody is able to be who they want to be, right? And I think we need to treat each other as, who does this person want to be? How do we facilitate them to be what they want for themselves? I think remove comparative analysis and focus on the ability to give every person, right, the ability to be who they want to be. Obviously, right now, we're in a massive disproportion, whether we're thinking about class, socioeconomical status, and in this instance, we're talking about gender. We need to create a space where every woman is able to be like, this is what I want to be, and there is an avenue for me to access that.
Who creates that space, Fola?
Who creates that space? We do.
We, you, me.
Yes,
everybody.
We all have a role to play.
Government.
Let's just illustrate. We were here a few weeks ago and had a very animated discussion about.
By here, you mean GAIA House?
GAIA House, yes. And what was the topic? Why is there a repeated failure of the country to pass the gender equity bill? And, we had some very, very good speakers in the room. I moderated it, actually. And it was really interesting and insightful. And one of the outcomes that came from that is that collectively we need to own it. and leaving it just to a sponsor. Beg her pardon. The senator from Ekiti was the lady that had taken it to the
BCF.
Yes, no, not her. Gosh, I've forgotten her name now, but I'll remember. But yes, she was the one that had taken it. I think it had gone third reading and it failed. And we were just trying to really understand why. And one of the main reasons that came out was that it was stated that in the North, equity or gender parity doesn't exist in the Quran. And
as they say,
and as a result of that, we challenge that, and that's part of how we can move this needle, challenging the status quo, really educating, standing up, being resilient, and not backing down. Policy legislation is fundamentally important. There was a Gallup, and I'm going to read it actually. I looked. There's a Gallup survey, and it says, "Why does society do they really treat women differently to men?" And 45% says society do treat men differently to women. And when you look at that, and only 9% favors women. Only 9%. That's obviously globally. It was done a few years ago. But the point is, if you think about it in Nigeria, I don't even want to know what percentage it is. I can guarantee it's definitely lower. So again, how can we change this? I think it's really about owning the whole and really, challenging those status quos, understanding. We invited stakeholders. We are going to go. I mean, one of the outcomes of that was one of the senators came back. We flipped him. He became an ally. And he actually went back to that particular senator.
To go and try and convince him.
To ask him why. And, we've been given an audience and we've been invited now to Abuja along with the GAIA Africa team.
Fantastic.
To go and have a conversation.
So you're putting your money where your mouth is. Yeah. You're pushing, and that's what we're asking everybody to do. But first of all, educate yourself. And then be able to share that. Because what I hear you guys say, but I won't let you go without talking about social media and what it's done, the mob action, what it's done. Has it done anything to advance or pull back, this whole concept of women parity? Because they're vicious in that space. Why is he laughing?
I laugh because I feel that, every conversation that brings topics that are as important as this to the forefront, they can be as vicious and whatever. The fact is, these conversations are really important. And I think it's important that people are uncomfortable, because I think it's through that discomfort that we're able to sort of challenge the status quo and also interrogate our own biases. Unconscious, conscious, whatever. I'm talking purely from a point of view of a man here, and I think there are spaces which, I find myself at times unable to enter in conversations. Yeah, and I think rightly so, because I feel that
what knowledge do I have?
There's not even knowledge. We've been talking for how many years now? Not that people want to talk. Just balance yourself. But I also think that it's important that the men don't stay out of conversations, right? Absolutely. Even though those conversations may be difficult for them to have, or they may be challenged. I think it's important as men that we are able to sort of say, okay, well, it may be fair, but I don't understand or I disagree. And not be scared to be bashed or called names.
So you're kind of implying that men may be very reluctant to express their different views because they could be bashed.
I think they're men that are able to express their views out of ignorance. I think they're men that are maybe nervous to express their view out of ego. But I think majority of men are sort of kind of lost as to the conversations that are being had, which is why a conversation is always important.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to even take it a step further and not just categorize only social media. I'm going to actually categorize the media, both the traditional and the social. Because when you think about what, do they actually perpetuate gender inequality? Yes, they do. I will say yes, because when you read some of the headlines and how they tend to skew certain headlines. When we think about when Hillary Clinton was running, I do recall vividly grandmother-in-chief. I mean, why would you, label her as that when she's running for the first president of one of the first world nations? When you think about a number of other examples, we have so many whereby they're sort of emphasizing the traditional view of women rather than, what women can actually do. And that influences gender inequality. And it's a problem. And I think one way of combating that is really when we're sitting down like this and they ask you, oh, you look nice today, you can reverse it. I mean, would you ask a woman that question? Would you ask a man that question? And I can guarantee you they wouldn't. So why would you ask a woman or say, do you understand what I mean? So these are I keep going back to disrupt, challenge, and take action. And these are some of the things that I feel would really play a big role. And obviously social media, that's a different beast on its own, so I wouldn't even go there, but that's why I put them all together.
But the thing is, if we have to cause change, we've got to face it, right? And see the truth as it is, regardless, right? Is that what you're saying, Papa, as we round up?
I just have a funny story, because I remember many years ago, I think I was in my 20s, and I was dating somebody, and I think it was the first date, and we went out to dinner, and I was obviously growing up, the idea of what a gentleman is. I've got to open doors and whatever.
Yes.
And literally,
yes.
The entire day was why are you opening the door for me? I was like, huh? It's I'm being romantic. What? Why are you opening doors for me? And it was literally everything that I did, which was literally based on who I thought I needed to be as a man, in terms of this is what men do. We open doors, we do this. I was constantly challenged in that situation. And it was the first time that I'd really thought about what it is that I'm naturally sort of conditioned to do. And I think this is the subtle things that we need to really kind of constantly challenge. It's not to say that you shouldn't open doors.
Oh, I'm so happy you said that. Because
I think Fola was going to say. So I think we must round up here.
It's just not to assume that every woman wants it.
Absolutely. I think the problem we're having as we round up, the problem we're having, and I hear you all, attitudes are formed, they're shaped by human beings. You also mentioned the fact that religion has a role to play, but because they're shaped by human beings, we can change it. Now, we need to change it because we need to move the needle. And what I hear you say, men and women are different, but there should be equity, and we need to change our attitudes. I must say thank you, no matter how difficult it is, keep talking about it, whether it's social media or wherever. Thank you for the conversations, and it still remains our conversations around moving that needle on gender parity, and it's all our business. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Pleasure to be here.